The deepest despair is not the one that screams in the middle of the night, but the one that disguises itself as normality during the day. Søren Kierkegaard understood something that most people will never come to understand. The true terror of human existence does not lie in death, but in living an entire life without truly knowing oneself. This is not an accidental failure. It is a psychological survival strategy, a defense mechanism so sophisticated that most people not only use it but also celebrate it as a virtue. Self-knowledge is not a romantic journey towards enlightenment. It is a terrifying expedition into the depths of your own falsehood. Each layer you remove reveals another mask beneath, and beneath that mask there is another and yet another, until you reach the fundamental question that most prefer not to ask. Does anything truly exist beneath all these masks? Or are you simply a collection of disguises that you have mistaken for an identity? Kierkegaard called it despair, but not the obvious despair of suffering. He described a silent despair, an unconscious despair, the despair of someone who doesn't even know they are in despair. This is the natural condition of the modern human, an anesthetized existence where evasion has become so natural that we don't even recognize it as evasion. We wake up, check our devices, consume content carefully designed to keep us in a state of perpetual distraction, work in jobs that define us but that we rarely question, return home to consume more content, and repeat the cycle until one day, if we're lucky or unlucky, something breaks and we are forced to look into the abyss we've been avoiding all our lives. Kierkegaard identified 3 stages of human existence: the aesthetic, the ethical, and the religious. But these are not merely stages of development. They are progressively more sophisticated cages that we build to avoid confronting ourselves. The aesthetic individual lives for pleasure, novelty, and constant stimulation. He is the perfect consumer, the ideal user of any platform designed to capture attention. He jumps from experience to experience, from relationship to relationship, from project to project, always seeking the next dose of external meaning, because the internal one is a void he prefers not to explore. When the aesthetic stage collapses, when pleasure no longer satisfies and novelty becomes repetitive, the individual has 2 options: face the emptiness or build a more sophisticated cage. Most choose the second and move towards the ethical stage. Now, identity is not built around pleasure, but around duty, responsibility, and social roles. You become the good employee, the responsible father, the model citizen. This cage is more comfortable because it comes with social approval, a borrowed sense of purpose, and the illusion that you are living authentically because you are fulfilling your obligations. But Kierkegaard knew that the ethical stage is simply another form of evasion, because you can perfectly fulfill all your social roles and still have no idea who you really are. In fact, roles can be the most effective tool to avoid self-knowledge. When someone asks you who you are, you respond with your profession, your marital status, your affiliations. You list your functions as if they were an identity. And maybe they are, but they are a borrowed identity, an identity handed to you by the social system in which you were born, not one you have forged from your own experience of existence. The world is full of people who have spent decades perfecting their public persona, without taking a moment to explore their private experience. They have learned what to say in every situation, how to behave to gain approval, which opinions are acceptable, and which should be hidden. They have become such consummate actors of their own lives that they have forgotten they are performing. The mask has merged with the face. And here is where Kierkegaard's philosophy becomes truly disturbing, because he does not suggest that beneath all these masks, there is an authentic self waiting to be discovered, as self-help gurus promise. What he suggests is much more terrifying, that the self is not something given, but something that must be created. And creating a genuine self requires something most people are not willing to do. Take absolute responsibility for your existence. This responsibility is unbearable. It means recognizing that every moment of your life is a choice, that there is no script to follow, that there is no external authority that can tell you what to do, that every action is a declaration of who you decide to be at that moment. Most people flee from this freedom towards what Sartre would later call bad faith, the denial of our own freedom, the pretense that we are objects determined by external forces rather than free subjects who choose at every moment. Modern society has perfected the mechanisms of evasion. We have built entire social structures designed to protect us from existential anguish. Infinite entertainment, work that consumes all identity, social networks that allow us to curate edited versions of ourselves, ideologies that offer us pre-made answers to questions we have never truly asked ourselves. Each of these is a tool to avoid encountering silence, solitude, and the fundamental question: when you remove everything that externally defines you, what remains? For most, the answer is too frightening to contemplate, because what remains could be nothing. Or worse, what remains could be something you do not recognize, something that contradicts the narrative you have been building about yourself for decades. You might discover that the things you thought you valued are simply values you absorbed from your environment. You might discover that the beliefs you thought were yours are echoes of Chiji voices. You might discover that the person you have been presenting to the world has no connection to what you truly experience in the privacy of your own consciousness. Kierkegaard understood that self-knowledge is not a process of discovery, but of creation, and that this creation requires something he called the leap of faith. Not the leap toward an institutional religion, but the leap toward accepting your own radical subjectivity, accepting that you exist in a state of constant choice and that no external authority can absolve you from the responsibility of those choices. This leap is terrifying because it means giving up all psychological crutches, all excuses, all external reasons we have used to explain why we are the way we are. The resistance to this process is not irrational. It is deeply rational, because genuine self-knowledge destroys comfort. Once you start seeing the patterns of your own evasion, you can't stop seeing them. Once you recognize the ways in which you have been living in bad faith, acting roles instead of living authentically, every moment becomes a conscious choice between continuing the act or risking authenticity. And authenticity has a very high social price. Living authentically in a society that functions through conformity is to be perceived as a threat. Authentic people make others feel uncomfortable because their very existence is a reminder that there is another way to live, that cages are optional, that we are choosing our own prison. That is why societies have developed sophisticated mechanisms to punish authenticity: social exclusion, ridicule, pathologization. If you dare to question too much, if you refuse to play by the unwritten rules, if you insist on living according to your own values instead of the group's values, you will be marked as problematic, as difficult, as someone who doesn't fit. And here is the perfect trap. To know yourself, you need to detach from social judgment. But detaching from social judgment means risking ostracism. And ostracism is one of the most painful psychological experiences a human being can endure. We are social animals. Our survival for millennia depended on belonging to the group. Exclusion is not only uncomfortable, it activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. So most choose the safety of conformity over the risk of self-knowledge. But even those willing to pay the social price face another more insidious obstacle: self-deception. We cannot truly know ourselves because a significant part of our psyche is specifically designed to deceive us. Our brains construct narratives that protect our self-image. We remember selectively, interpret favorably, and constantly rationalize. Every experience passes through multiple filters before being admitted into consciousness, and those filters are programmed to preserve the story we have told ourselves about who we are. Psychoanalytic therapy aims to create a space where these mechanisms can be observed, where the narrative you have built about yourself can be questioned. But even in therapy, self-deception persists. You build new narratives to replace the old ones, create new rationalizations, find new ways to avoid what you do not want to see. Self-knowledge is not a destination you reach after enough therapy, enough meditation, or enough self-reflection. It is an endless process of unmasking, and each mask removed reveals another mask underneath. Kierkegaard recognized something that modern self-help culture refuses to admit. Self-knowledge does not make you happier. In fact, it can make you deeply unhappy. Because once you see clearly the ways in which you have been living falsely, once you recognize the distance between who you are and who you have been pretending to be, that awareness is painful. Ignorance is not just happiness, it is functional. It allows you to participate in society without constantly being aware of the absurdity of most social conventions. It allows you to take roles seriously that, seen from enough distance, are arbitrary and constructed. That's why most people who claim to seek self-knowledge are actually seeking self-validation. They don't want to see themselves clearly. They want to feel better about themselves. They want a more flattering narrative, not a more accurate vision. Genuine self-knowledge is brutal. It shows you your cowardice, your hypocrisy, your inconsistencies. It reveals the ways you've rationalized behaviors that contradicted your declared values. It shows you that you are not the hero of your own story, but often the obstacle. And yet, Kierkegaard argued that this painful process is the only path to what he called the religious stage of existence, although his concept of religious has little to do with institutional religion. The religious stage is the recognition that your existence is fundamentally absurd, that there is no rational justification for your choices, that you live in a state of irresolvable paradox, and yet you choose to commit to your life, your values, your way of being in the world. Not because they make sense, but because they are yours. This is the difference between living reactively and living actively. Most people live reactively, responding to external stimuli, following social scripts, optimizing for others' approval. Their lives are a series of conditioned responses to situations they did not choose. Self-awareness creates the possibility of living actively, of consciously choosing instead of reacting unconsciously. But this possibility comes with a burden. Once you know that you are choosing, you can no longer hide behind the excuse that you had no option. The modern tragedy is that we have created a culture that promises self-knowledge while providing endless tools for evasion. Self-help books promise to reveal your true self in 10 simple steps. Meditation apps offer inner peace in 5-minute sessions. Life coaches sell formulas for personal success. But all of this is part of the same evasion system. Because true self-knowledge does not come in a convenient package. There is no app for existential anguish. There is no productivity hack for confronting your own falsehood. What Kierkegaard understood is that self-knowledge requires solitude. Not the solitude of being alone in your room with your phone, but the solitude of being completely disconnected from all external voices that constantly tell you who you should be. This solitude is so rare in the modern world that most people never experience it. We are constantly connected, constantly consuming others' opinions, constantly comparing ourselves, constantly adjusting our self-image based on external feedback. In this cacophony of voices, your own voice gets lost. You don't even know what it sounds like because you've never had enough silence to hear it. And when you finally have that silence, when you're finally alone with your thoughts without any distraction, the experience is so uncomfortable that most immediately reach for the phone, turn on the television, call someone, anything to escape that terrifying encounter with the inner emptiness. But that emptiness is not the problem. The emptiness is the space where self-awareness can begin. It is only when you remove all external definitions, all roles, all expectations, that you can start to discern what is truly yours and what you've been carrying because others expected you to do so. This process of discrimination is the work of a lifetime, not a weekend spiritual retreat. Kierkegaard also understood that self-knowledge is inextricably linked to the confrontation with mortality. You cannot truly know yourself without recognizing that you are a temporary being, that your existence is finite, that every moment you spend living in falsehood is a moment you will never recover. The awareness of death is not morbid, it is clarifying. It eliminates the superficial, exposes what truly matters, and forces decisions that you would otherwise postpone indefinitely. This denial of mortality is perhaps the greatest obstacle to self-knowledge, because without the urgency that comes from recognizing your finiteness, there is not enough motivation to do the painful work of dismantling the illusions you have built. You can keep saying that you will do it tomorrow or next year, or when you retire, or when the children grow up, or when you have more time. And before you know it, you have spent an entire life preparing to live authentically without ever doing it. Self-knowledge is not a state that you reach and then maintain permanently. It is a practice, a continuous process of vigilance against self-deception, because your psyche is constantly generating new narratives, new rationalizations, new ways to avoid uncomfortable truths. What you saw clearly yesterday may be obscured today by a new layer of self-deception. The work never ends. And perhaps this is the deepest reason why most never come to know themselves, because it is a never-ending task, without guaranteed reward, without a clear goal, without external validation. There is no diploma you receive at the end. There is no certificate of authenticity. There is only the continuous process of questioning, examining, being willing to see what you don't want to see. Kierkegaard called this subjectivity, but not in the modern relativist sense, where every opinion is equally valid. Subjectivity for him meant fully embracing your unique perspective, recognizing that you exist from a particular point of view in the universe that no one else can occupy, and that your task is not to conform to external objective truths, but to live your subjective truth with full commitment. This does not mean you can invent your own reality. It means you must find your own relationship with reality, rather than simply adopting the relationship you have been given. This search does not make you special. It does not make you enlightened. It does not make you superior to those who have chosen the easier path of conformity. It simply makes you aware, painfully aware, of the distance between how you live and how you could live. And that awareness is both a blessing and a curse. So why do most never come to know themselves? Because doing so requires a courage that is extraordinarily rare. It requires being willing to lose the approval of others, to question the most fundamental beliefs about yourself, to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, to face the possibility that who you have been so far is largely a construction, not a revelation. It requires choosing the uncomfortable truth over the comfortable illusion again and again, without knowing if that path leads anywhere. Most choose the alternative, to live in what Thoreau called silent despair, a life of imitation rather than creation, of reaction rather than action, of conformity rather than authenticity. And the tragedy is not that these people are unhappy. Many can maintain superficial happiness for decades. The tragedy is that they will never know who they could have been. Because in the end, self-knowledge is not about discovering some pre-existing essence. It is about consciously creating who you are, instead of letting external forces create you. It is the difference between being the author of your life and being a character in someone else's script. And most people die without having written a single page of their own story. Now, while you listen to this, there is a question you cannot avoid. Are you part of that majority? How much of what you believe you are is truly yours, and how much is an echo of expectations you never questioned? Are you living, or are you acting? When was the last time you sat in complete silence with your thoughts, without seeking a distraction, without a plan, without a goal, just to see what emerges when all masks are removed? And if that idea terrifies you, if your first reaction is to find a reason not to do it, isn't that the answer you were looking for?